Michael Schlossman here with us today. Mike, welcome to the Next Level Conversation. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Jeff. I'm good. How are you?
It's good. It's good to see you. What have we known each other
It's
like?
good.
What'd you say?
I was doing the math today. I think it's 44 years.
No, it's
I
it
think I think we met in third grade.
no, it's no, we were 4 years old, no? Or older.
4 years old?
We were
How old
we
are we
were
now?
52.
We're not four. Let's put it that way.
All right, we've known each other over 45 about 45 years.
So our houses were back to back. People should
Right.
know that.
Right. Back
And
back
we
to
we
back.
were I think we were about 7 years old.
All
So
right.
it's about 45 years, something like that.
Yeah, 4 or 7. It's a really long-standing relationship, but I wanted to have
It's
you
been a
on
long
today.
time.
Yeah, I wanted to have you on today because Um, I think you're a great person, and I think you have a really incredible story. And I believe that um, some of the transitions and changes that you've made in your life are an incredible example. And I think a lot of people would like to hear your story. I know I'd like to hear your story a little bit more. And I think people that will listen can really garner a lot of just great insight and things that you've learned and how you've changed your life. I guess the first thing is like maybe you can tell people what you're up to these days and what are you doing now in your life, and then we can go back from there about how you got here.
Sure. So you were saying I'm 52 years old. I'm about to be 53. We both have our hair, which is pretty cool.
Mm,
And I live in Deerfield Beach, Florida. I'm the CEO and general counsel of a substance abuse treatment facility called Sober Living in Delray.
mm,
And I'm also the executive director of a treatment program we have called Living Sober, which is a non clinical 12-step immersion program where people come to address their problems with alcohol and drugs.
right,
That's what I do these days,
right,
which is a very big difference from what I used to do. So,
right, right,
180-degree turn.
right. So why don't you just let's how many years have you been doing what you're doing right now, and how many years have you been in Florida, and then we'll back up a little bit about how you made your migration to Florida.
Sure. I got to Florida. I'll never forget. It was December 17th, 2010.
Hmm.
And I thought my life was over. And
Hmm.
we'll get into the story in a little bit. But I've been doing this now for about 7 years. I've been in this industry.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's interesting talking to you about it because you have been there with me through the whole journey, by my side as a friend,
Hmm.
shoulder to shoulder, walking this with me. When I was in the hospital originally about 9 years ago, there were three people I asked my dad to call, and one of them was you. And I really have to thank you for being there with me the whole way through. So
Well, I
it's been an
appreciate it, man.
interesting walk. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've learned a lot from it, and our friendships evolved and changed due to it. But why don't we go back to you know I guess lead up before the major event we're going to talk about. Why don't you
Hmm.
why don't you drop back like a year and a half into your usage and what was going on, which led up to that major event, which you can talk about if you want to or not.
Yeah, and I what I think you mean is, in my 40s, but let's go back to when we were like 12 years old,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and hanging out after West Hollow Middle School, I guess they call it now. We called it something else, junior high school. But I remember hanging out with the guys, and an interesting thing. I've learned a lot about me. I've learned a lot about human behavior, and I've learned that I didn't know what I suffered from until I no longer suffered from it anymore. And specifically, let me talk about anxiety for a second.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea that I was an anxious little kid. And I
Right.
had no idea that that was a symptom of alcoholism and addiction. Lots of people are anxious and lots of people do things, but I had no idea that at 12 years old, I already had a genetic disposition towards the disease of alcoholism and addiction. And I had no idea what was about to happen the first time I ever tried pot. And I don't think you were there that day, but I remember I was playing football with a bunch of guys, after school, and I remember there was a joint going around one way, and there was a fifth going around the other way. And I remember the joint got to me first, and I remember taking a hit off the joint, and I remember the effect was immediate and it was sudden, and I felt a sense of peace, ease, and comfort that I had never felt before in my life. Now I'm 12 years old. I'm not thinking these things at that time. All I'm realizing is that for the first time in my life, and I only understand this looking backwards, but looking backwards, I can understand that for the first time in my life, I felt quote unquote normal. And I started to understand that I loved the effect produced by drugs. And then when the fifth got to me and that warm feeling and the congeniality and conviviality of the football game got a heck of a lot more interesting because we were all loosened up.
Hmm.
I loved the effect produced by alcohol and drugs from the very moment I first tried it.
Right.
And I had no idea that that was going to be the story of my life for the next 31 years. I just didn't know that until I was 43 years old. All I knew is that I suffered from these things like anxiety and depression and fear and loneliness and isolation and pride and envy and greed and lust and jealousy and anger. And by the way, these are just things.
Right.
But what I didn't realize is that, for lack of a better word, that I had for 31 years used substances as a coping mechanism to
Right.
deal with these things.
Right. I want to just
What
ask.
I also didn't,
I want. I
yeah, go
want. I
ahead.
don't want to stop you, but I just don't want to forget this. There's two things that you talked about. You have a genetic predisposition to
Yeah,
addiction. I guess
right.
I want to hold on to one question. So a lot of people have anxiety. A lot of people have fear.
Sure.
A lot of people have loneliness. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to become an addict. They're going to
That's right.
deal. They're going to deal
That's
with it
right.
other ways.
That's right.
And the second thing is that not in addition to not everybody wanting to or will use drugs, what are some of the ways that they'll cope with it, which won't lead to addiction. And
Sure.
I guess what I also wanted to add is I think there's a lot of people that have not had experience with addiction or drugs look upon it as like a bad thing. He's a druggie. He has a problem. A lot of people
Sure.
a lot of people don't understand why people do drugs. They don't just do drugs because they want to be an outcast or hang out on the outskirts of society. There's a reason why what you're talking about. So I just wanted to hang on a
Sure.
couple of those things while you're talking and continue.
Yeah. No. And all of these things are important questions and are important to understand. Addicts and alcoholics have a genetic defect in the pleasure center of our brains. Essentially, the pleasure center of our brains go haywire, and it's known that selfishness and self-centeredness is sort of the center of our lives, and we'll do anything to feel good: shopping, eating, sex spree, all sorts of different sprees.
Right.
Alcohol and or drugs is just one of them. And so you'll notice a common thread amongst alcoholics and addicts, that the seeking of pleasure, the the um, the, uh, the attainment of selfishness above all else, even though we don't think so, is something that we see the world through. That nothing matters but me, which
Right.
is hard to see in our society because our society is a very selfish society.
Right.
So it's called self will run riot. It just goes absolutely berserk in people like us. And you're right. The world walks around anxious and depressed and lonely and sad. Most people live lives of quiet desperation. And you'll see on any given Friday night, you're in New York City. In New York City, the bars are packed. The bars are
Right.
packed with people meeting their friends. The bars are packed with people celebrating. The bars are packed with people soaking their woes. What separates normal people from an alcoholic, though, is that alcoholics have an obsession of the mind where it's the only thing they can think about. It's the first thing they think about in the morning, and it's the last thing they think about when they go to sleep at night. And the way that normal people can relate to this is if you're on a diet and you're on a very strict diet and Halloween's coming up and I love Reese's peanut butter cups.
Right.
And all you do is think about Reese's peanut butter cups and you're trying not to eat Reese's peanut butter cups. It's the thing you think about at night and it's the thing you think about, except for Reese's peanut butter cups aren't going to kill you.
Right.
But drugs and alcohol will. And the other thing the alcoholics have, other than an obsession of the mind, is something called a phenomenon of craving, where once you start, you can't stop. It's called an allergy being an abnormal reaction to.
Mm.
Um, and it's sort of a difficult thing to understand. It's like your body starts soaking it up and it can't stop until you essentially pass out, get put in jail, run out of money, whatever the deal is.
Right.
And this causes extreme problems in alcoholics and addicts. So,
Mm.
alcoholism and addiction is a progressive disease. So, you don't really see it in someone at 12 years old. You just see someone acting like a 12-year-old. I did an assessment on a 19-year-old girl today who's a blackout drinker. She doesn't look like a 40-year-old alcoholic. She doesn't talk like a 40-year-old alcoholic. And quite honestly, you don't know yet whether she's really an alcoholic because she has a 19-year-old disease, not a 40-year-old
Yeah.
disease. It gets progressively worse
Do
as time
you
goes on.
do you see a certain common thread in addition to the genetic predisposition? Do you see a common thread background in people that migrate or move or become an addict? Do you see is there a common theme? I mean, are people coming from like I would assume most people are not coming from the happiest household. I mean, most people are fucked up one way or another, even if they come from the best household. What do you see that's triggering it
You
in
know,
addition to the genetic predisposition?
sure. And this is where the disease of addiction, especially with the opiate crisis that's going on, gets very confusing because there's a difference. And I don't know how much we want to get into this between someone who gets addicted to a substance like
We
opiates,
go wherever
which are
you want to
very,
go with
very
it.
addictive,
Yeah, yeah. Go
right?
wherever you want to go.
Versus the true disease of addiction. Opiates are a very addictive substance. For people who are listening to this, you may go to the dentist and
Mm-hmm.
you may have a dental procedure, and the dentist may give you, say, a 5 day supply of Vicodin or something. And you may notice that when you're done with your 5 day supply of Vicodin, you get what you think is a little cold. That's actually withdrawal from the opiates because opiates are a very addictive substance.
Right.
That's getting addicted to an addictive substance. The disease of addiction is very different. The disease of addiction has the obsession of the mind, the phenomenon of craving of the body, and what's called a spiritual malady, the thing that's been bugging us our whole lives, whether it's depression, low self esteem, pride, anger, greed, jealousy, lust, self pity, all sorts of things which fuel the entire thing. And it turns out, and here's the really confusing thing about alcohol and drug use, it's actually not the problem. Alcoholics and drug addicts use substances because it actually solves the underlying problem. We feel like such crap about ourselves that
Mm.
they have the same effect produced in them that I did when I was 12 years old. It finally makes us feel normal.
Right.
So it's actually the solution to our problem. And
Right.
when you take away the alcohol and the drugs, we don't feel normal anymore. That's why we run. We're basically, this is really interesting. We're
Mm.
basically the only animal on earth. Think about this. We're at the top of the food chain, right?
Right.
We have these enormous brains. We control the world. We're almighty and all this stuff. And we go to the moon and we're about to go to Mars. But yet we're the only animal on earth that goes back to that which is killing us. Think about that.
You mean talking about
Squirrels look at us and they're,
like you mean
squirrels look at us and they're like, dude, you're screwed up. Like, why would you do that? You know?
right.
So,
You mean like why are you taking it? Why you're taking a substance that can
right.
kill
Why?
you?
And so people stop and then they go back to it. Like, why would you go back to it once you're done? Because we don't feel good.
So
And
you're
all we
saying
want to
you're
do is
saying that
feel good.
someone that gets addicted to smoking cigarettes is a lot different than someone who's getting addicted to an opiate or cocaine or whatever amphetamine whatever it may be to just feel normal. Is that what
Well,
you're saying?
actually, cigarette addiction is much like regular addiction because the drug in a cigarette is much like any other drug, and
Mm,
people smoke because they like the effect produced by that drug.
right.
So cigarette addiction is actually a very hard addiction to break.
Right.
So what I'm saying is once you get rid of the chemicals, once you get rid of the alcohol and or the drugs, it's the underlying issues that need to be properly dealt with in order
Right.
to completely arrest the disease of addiction once and for all. And that's the thing that I never knew. I never knew. So 2 years before I was ready to actually get sober, 2 years before the end in 2008, I went to detox. And I thought if I just got the chemicals out of my body, everything would be okay. And that kind of makes sense, right?
Right.
If the alcohol and the drugs are the problem, if you just get the alcohol and drugs out of your body, everything will be great. Well, that's not what happened. Lo and behold, I got out of detox and things got worse. The racing thoughts got worse. The anxiety got worse. The depression got worse.
Right.
The anger got worse. The fear, oh my Lord, the fear was terrible. And so
What were you
eventually I
what
just
were you
went
afraid of?
everything.
Right.
And it was, all fear is irrational, completely irrational stuff. Fear of yesterday, fear of tomorrow, fear of this, fear of that,
Right.
fear. They
Mm.
asked me to write down all my fears when I eventually went to treatment, and I wrote
Right.
everything and every one. I mean, everything. I
You,
mean,
you handed him like a 100-page book with fears. Right. Here you go.
any
500 pages
any
of fear.
Yeah. So it's a disease unlike any other. Here's the other problem with alcoholism and addiction. I had a
Mm.
really hard time accepting that there was something wrong with me, because when you have another disease like cancer, or you break your arm, or anything, the
Mm.
doctor takes an MRI or an X-ray or an ultrasound, or can slap something up, can show you blood results, can show you the X-ray. There's no X-ray for this.
Right.
There's no blood test for this. You have to diagnose yourself and finally admit to your innermost self that, okay, this is what I am, and I need to get a way out of this. And by the way, I felt cursed when this first happened. So there was no way in the world that I was going to admit that I was an alcoholic or an addict. I mean, there was no way in the world. And to someone like me, you got to be kidding me.
Right.
So pride kept me sick for a very long time.
I remember talking to you on the beach that day, and you were talking about basically that your doctors made you an addict, and you were not involved in the
Right,
process at all. And I'm like, okay,
right.
I'll see you in a few
Okay,
months, and you could tell me how that's
yeah,
going.
yeah.
But I think
So
I just want to point out one thing
yeah,
though that for people that may be listening or will listen is that addiction, it's everywhere. It's in every family. I mean, I've had girlfriends, I've had friends. I've known a lot of people that have battled with drugs, including you.
yeah.
It's rampant. It's rampant, in this country, and it does not distinguish between
It doesn't
classes.
discriminate.
It
Yeah,
doesn't discriminate.
yeah,
It's any class.
right.
It's any income strata. It's there.
Yeah,
Um, um, I know you were talking about the opiates, and I think it's a crazy number. It's like over 50,000 people here died from opiate
it's insane.
addiction. Yeah.
It's
Um,
absolutely insane.
I just want to, as you're talking, I just want to make a couple of points, as we move along. So just continue with what you were saying. I just things that come out. I want to add.
Well, so it took me a very long time to understand the nature of the beast, because I didn't know what this was.
Mm.
And what I was taught was you can't get out of jail unless you know you're in jail to begin with.
All right.
So I tried to fight this, whatever it was, with all sorts of tools, which didn't work. I tried to problem solve. So I tried to basically solve it with my mind, with my brain,
Right.
because that's what we do in America. You learn these problem solving skills when you're little, right? Like in
Right.
nursery school and in kindergarten. When you and I were in class, they taught us problem solving skills, and you learn by trial and error. So you use these problem solving skills towards different problems along the way, and they work and they don't work. And then I came up against this thing, and I tried with all my might. I researched and talked and this and switched and weaned and moved and did all these things, and nothing worked. And I started to become very broken. And
Right.
I started to become especially broken as a man, because I was failing my family.
Right.
And especially I was failing my now ex-wife, and I was failing my daughter. And my daughter, who's now 14, she was 5.5 at the time, is very integral in this story, because all me and my ex-wife wanted was a little girl. And my daughter very well. And she would come. I wanted to be the dad who gave my daughter the baths, and I wanted to be the dad that taught my daughter to swim. And I was largely successful at giving her the baths because she was very young and my disease hadn't progressed that far yet. But when it came to teaching her to swim, early on, yes, but as she started to get around 4 or 5 years old, I was I was drunk and high a lot.
Right.
And she would come to me on a Friday night and she would say, "Daddy, are we going swimming on Sunday?" And I would say, "Yes, sure, sweetie, of course. Sunday, 2 o'clock. That was our time to go to the Y."
Right.
And she would say, but that's what you told me last Sunday,
Right.
and you were too sick in bed. We would tell her that I was sick. And sure enough, Sunday at 2 o'clock would come, and I would hear her downstairs crying,
Mm-hmm.
and it would just break me as a man. And the more broken I felt, the more I drank and used, and the more I drank and used, the more broken I felt, and I spiraled. I spiraled hard down into a hole, and pride was so large in me. I lived in a place called Greenwich, Connecticut, which is one of the largest, wealthiest zip codes in America, and I was ashamed. I didn't even think to pick up the phone
Right.
and call 911 or walk into an ER or go to a recovery fellowship, because I thought I would get arrested. I thought I would be in trouble. I didn't
Well,
know the help that was there for me.
most
I didn't think to
people,
call you and ask for help.
right. Well, most people, I mean, you can confer with this or not, most people don't know they have the problem, or they know they have a problem, but they don't want to admit
Yeah,
that it's addiction, that they have an addiction problem. I mean, that's why
right.
there's always there's always these interventions that people, a
Yeah, yeah,
family will have, or friends will get together. No one's like, I'm
yeah,
fucked up. Where do I go? I really need to fix this. Most
yeah,
people are like, I'm good. It's somebody else's fault. It's somebody
yeah.
else's
Well,
problem.
here's what I really thought was the problem. I thought if I could just make more money, the stress would go away, and if the stress went away, I wouldn't use and drink so much. So to me, in the sick alcoholic mind, money was the answer.
Right.
And so this carrot was held out over me that I couldn't get past.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. 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 And
So
because of the
so it spiraled.
and the money, or like doing drugs at the same time, was interfering with your work, so it's probably putting a financial
Oh
strain
yeah.
on your family. And so you figured, if you
Oh
had the comfort, or the nest of a lot more cash, you'd feel better, and
yeah.
you wouldn't want to use.
Right.
But you can have a lot of money. You could have a lot of money too, and still have a shitload of anxiety. It doesn't. You don't have to
Sure.
be.
I attributed it all to the stress of life, and what I and to me it was all, I was just stressed out and needed to retire, and I had absolutely no idea what I was suffering from. Absolutely no idea.
Right.
And so and the thing was is that I was sleeping most of the day. My waking life had just become so painful.
Mm-hmm.
My psychological and mental state had become so agonizing, that I hated to be awake, and so I would drink and use to go to sleep. And by the way, hiding everything from everybody. I had bottles hidden everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
um, and prescriptions hidden everywhere, and my ex-wife didn't even know that any of this was going on, and I was very good about it. I was very
Right.
good about it. And managing to hold on to a job that I basically didn't show up for. I mean, I don't know how I juggled it for as long as I did. And I would sleep, 14, 16, 18, 20 hours a day, because all I wanted to
Really.
do was sleep and dream. That's all I
Right.
wanted to do,
I'm
because I,
sure.
I was at peace when I was sleeping.
I'm sure when you woke up, it was fun. For the first hour.
I,
Yeah.
I,
Sleeping all day. Wow. I
yeah.
know.
So this is what led to the end. Because really the only highlight of my day was when my daughter would come home from school. She would get home from school about 2 or 2:30, and by this time I was a complete shut-in in my little McMansion in Greenwich,
Right.
and I had blackout shades covering blackout shades, and they were tacked to the wall. And God forbid a single ray of light should come through. I was 70 pounds lighter than I am now. I
Yeah.
couldn't eat. My diet consisted of about two Oreo cookies a day,
Mm-hmm.
and we had no money. I was stealing food and firewood from local supermarkets.
Wow.
Um, every time I go back, I make another amends. This last time I was back, I walked in with a boatload of cash, and made an amends. And I'm like, look, this is going to sound weird, but
Mm.
9 years ago, I used to steal a bunch of wood from you, and I
What,
know
the
this is a
local
little
store?
strange, but
Someone's
yeah,
house, or a store?
no, a store. And this
What
is
kind of, like,
I used to
starter
steal
logs?
cold cuts. I started logs too.
Was your wife working?
And I Well, yeah, but we weren't making enough money.
Right.
And and my
Mm,
car got repoed in the middle of the night. So I was stealing firewood, I was stealing cold cuts, I was stealing stuff, and I didn't want to eat anything because I wanted my daughter to have all the food. So I was eating about two Oreo cookies. I mean, it was not a good situation. My wife hated me. She
mm,
was living in the guest room. She hated me. I
right.
stunk. I never showered.
Right.
I had one friend at the time. It was my psychologist who I paid to see me once a week,
Right.
um, and he had to like me because I was paying him.
Right.
And so the
He's like,
highlight
you're
of my
doing.
day
He's
would
like,
be
you're
when
doing great. Really.
he's like, "You're great. Well, good. I'll see you next week. Bring cash."
Right.
So so the highlight of my day was when my daughter would come home from school, and so it was December 6th, 2010,
Right.
and I was you know to say that I was depressed is the understatement of the world. I was bitterly depressed. I was having suicidal thoughts for months. There were three or four times where I would swallow 10 Clonopin, a bunch of Percocets in sort of a feeble attempt to kill myself, and I would wake up and I
You
was
do.
I
You
was
take 10.
pissed.
You take like 10
Oh
Klonopin.
yeah.
You were out.
Yeah, I would take a
You were
bunch.
fucking
Yeah.
out. You
I
drink of that
really
too?
wasn't, tell you the truth.
Were you drink of that?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but it was having no effect.
You weren't doing anything
So
like
so
blow. You weren't
no,
doing.
no, well, no, I would never touch that. But
Right.
no, but no, I was doing opiates, benzodiazepines, alcohol, pot, all downers. I
Right.
did,
But
I,
you were
I wasn't an
building up.
upper guy.
You were building up a tolerance as well as
I
this
had
went along.
huge, I had huge tolerance, huge
Right.
tolerance.
Like you could pop like 30, 40 pills in a day and still not function, but
Easily.
it wouldn't take down. That would take down an elephant who never took it before. But for you, probably, or people that are
So
heavily
yeah, at the end,
addicted.
I was taking about 800 milligrams of different opiates, about 20 milligrams of benzos, all different kinds of sleeping pills and muscle relaxers, and drinking and smoking pot. It
Right.
was not a good scene.
Here's the
So
$1 million question. Like, where are you getting all
yeah,
this shit from, and like, how are you paying for it?
well, so I was getting it from doctors.
Right. Right.
So at the time, Connecticut didn't have a database, and I was doctor shopping. I was going from
Right.
doctor to doctor, getting different prescriptions.
Right.
Um, and I knew how to play the system.
Right. The
I
pain
knew
is
what I
not
had to
going
say in order to
away.
get what I needed.
Every week they
Yeah,
just gave it to you to shut the fuck up. The pain isn't going
yeah.
away.
So, you look for these things. You look for red flags now in patients where they constantly lose their prescriptions and things like that. That's what I was doing.
Right.
Um, so, and I justified it. I'm not buying them off the street. I'm not buying them on the internet. I'm not using a needle. All the justification and rationalization that went into it. It's prescribed. It's
I
paid
mean,
for by
that's
insurance.
also a really good
So
point. You're going to say things tonight, and I hear things, and people will say, "Well, it was a prescribed drug. I didn't buy it off the
yeah,
street. I didn't get it from some fucking loser. It wasn't laced with anything." You're getting prescribed drugs that are made by large pharmaceutical companies,
sure,
and people are using them for their addiction problems. I mean, and,
right,
and people justify it. It's prescribed. I don't use cocaine. I don't.
yeah. And
It's
this is just my story. You
right.
know, um, these are complicated issues. I'm on the Delray Beach Drug Task Force. I'm the
Mm,
chairperson of the Palm Beach County Opiate Response Plan. We have a steering committee, and we're dealing with how to deal with opiate. These are complicated, multi-layer issues. Um, and if they weren't so complicated, it would be solved in 2 seconds.
right.
So yeah, there's multiple layers to these things: proper pain management, how do you deal with this, illegal drugs, and non-illegal, so all sorts of things. So this is just my story,
Right.
and I really don't, other people's stories or other people's stories, but I justified it, um, and I never crossed certain lines, but I almost did. I almost did. I can't tell you how many times I went on the internet and almost bought drugs from China, or took a trip to Mexico because I was running out.
They'd get there
But
fast like
something,
Chinese food.
but
Chinese food delivery.
but
10 minutes later, here are your opiates, Mr. Schlossman. Um,
4E.
yeah, but
So,
I mean, there's a common look. Every story is unique and different, but there's a common theme underlying, why you're doing it, and the fear, the
well,
anxiety, the pain. You
so
want to
so
make it feel
Jeff,
normal.
by the way, one of the common themes is I'm laying in bed,
Mhm.
completely, decrepit. I'm 43 years old, and my life is in the gutter. And by the way, I'm tearing my family apart.
Right.
My poor family. This
Yeah.
is this is the this was the woman of my dreams that I married, and this is the little girl that I love beyond compare. And
Right.
I've torn my family apart,
Right.
and I can't even bring myself to call 911 or to go to rehab or something. I'm in huge amount of trouble.
Because you don't know.
So I
You
didn't know. I
you
had
didn't.
no idea.
Whatever. You didn't want to face it. Look. Like I said, I had an ex girlfriend that was in that space. I had friends that were in that space before. It it takes a moment of desperation, a rock bottom moment, and
Yeah.
I know that this story is leading to that rock bottom moment. If you want to talk about it,
Yeah.
dude, talk about it. If you don't want to talk
Sure.
about it, it's totally cool. But
So,
like,
so the no, no, no. I speak about this a lot, and I think it's important because I didn't cry out for help and almost lost my life.
right,
And so now that I became a therapist a couple of years ago, and I'm very open about my story because if it encourages one person to seek help, too many of us are dying. So what happened was, that day on December 6th, 2010, my daughter came home from school, and I rumbled down the stairs and I went to hug her, and I got down on one knee and held my arms open, and she ran away from me.
yeah,
And I thought she was playing a game with me. And so I followed her around this chair that we had in the living room, and I said, "Sweetheart, what's going on? It's me. It's Daddy." And when I found her, she had her hands up like this,
mm-hmm.
and it took me a minute to understand that she was protecting herself from me.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, the dots connected that I had turned into an animal
Right,
because I had an extremely violent temper. Like you said, I was playing the victim. I blamed everybody for my problems. I was breaking things in the house. I was screaming. Thank God I never hit her or my ex-wife. It never got that bad, but I would take things and smash them and scream, and she was afraid of me.
right.
And I had a very, very sick thought at that moment, which is a very sick thought and I remember the thought exactly. Someone needs to remove me from the face of the earth, and that someone is me. And so what
Wow.
I had done over the last couple of weeks, I was getting ready to go on a trip, and I had gathered together an immense amount of pills. I had gathered together about 400 pills.
Like
And
going on a big camping trip.
yeah, I was I was
You
I was
ready?
stocking up for the apocalypse. And now looking back, I had done there were huge red flags that I was getting ready to do something. Like, you look for
Mm.
these signs in people. Like, one of the signs that someone's about to, try to commit suicide is that you start paying people off. And I was basically in blackout for days, and I went back like a year later and looked through my emails,
What do you mean
and
paying people off? What are you
I
paying?
had been going to the bank and paying off debts of people that I owed. And that's
Oh,
that's a sign that people are trying to settle their affairs before they leave this world.
okay.
And I don't remember any of this. I was just piecing it together from bank records and emails.
I would think you
And
wouldn't care
so
if you're gonna leave.
I I,
Fuck the
I don't
fifty
know.
bucks I
It's
owe
this weird.
Joe.
It's this weird thing.
I owe Joe $50, but it's not gonna matter next week.
What can I tell you?
Right.
So
Gotta pay the pizza guy
I
back.
I waited until nighttime,
Mm.
and I walked downstairs and I went into the kitchen that night, and I found my I was still married at the time, and I remember saying to my wife, I remember telling her goodbye, and and I remember telling her I loved her. Now I was saying goodbye. I'm leaving the earth. Sayonara.
Right.
When you see me next, I'm going to be dead.
Right. She's like, "Where are you going?
And
You going to a movie?"
yeah, and the way she took it was I was leaving on a trip the next day.
Right.
Um, but I remember saying to her, "I love you," and I remember exactly what she said to me. She said, "Love's not enough," and I don't believe that, by the way. Love is enough, but I remember that, and you met
Well, let me tell you
my
something.
wife when
When
I
I don't
first
take the
met.
garbage out regularly, love is not enough with my wife either.
but
So,
but
go
you
ahead.
know, I had put her through torture, you know, and
Mm,
I needed to let her go.
right.
And I went upstairs, and I had made a vow the day my daughter was born that I was going to pray at her bedside every night of her life until she was able to pray for herself. So she was sleeping. She was about 5.5 years old, and I got down on my knees and I prayed at her bedside. And it was a Hindu prayer for peace. And I said, Om Shanti, 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 peace, peace, peace.
Hmm.
May you have peace in your heart, peace in your mind, peace in your soul. And what came out after that was, God, please watch over her and do for her what I could never do for her, because I am the crappiest freaking father on the face of the earth. And I went into my room and I swallowed as many of the 400 pills as I could, washed it down with whatever was near me, and got into bed and waited to die. And before I did, I got down on my knees and I said something like, I'm ready, take me.
Right.
And I was, Jeff, I got to tell you, I was at perfect peace because I knew that I was going to see God. And as weird as that may sound,
Right.
and I knew I was going to finally be at peace and sleep forever. I didn't think at all about the selfishness of my wife finding me the next day, or God forbid my daughter finding me.
Well, you were in a bad place. You're not thinking
I was
that
in a
stuff.
bad place. As
You're
a
in a lot
matter
of
of fact,
pain.
Jeff, to make it
Yeah.
even sicker, I thought it was an honorable thing to do because I
Hmm.
thought that I would relieve my family of the burden of me for the rest of their lives.
Right.
It was very sick. And I also thought that they might get the insurance policy, which of course they wouldn't.
They would or they wouldn't.
So what happened is, you know, I was found the next day unresponsive and unconscious. I was in a coma for a couple of days, and you know, got out other plans. And I was transferred to another place where I had a seizure. I was transferred to a third hospital, and it was finally decided that I was going to go to a treatment center, and the journey began.
So you wake up. How many days later did you wake up?
3.5 days later,
Right, and you took like what, 100 pills, 200 pills,
about 400 pills,
400 pills, and you didn't die.
100 Percocet, 100 Clonopin, 100 Furacet, and 100 Ambien.
We got to call Guinness Book of Records, man. There's got to be
Yeah.
this guy's got to be a record. 400 pills and he doesn't die. Wow. So you wake up 3.5 days later. I'm not making fun of him, just making light of the situation. But you wake up because when you just say 400 pills of something that's synthetic, I mean,
Yeah,
the fact that you survived that, it was obviously meant to be for you to survive. And I'm happy, obviously, that
something
you
happened.
survived. So you wake
Something
up,
happened.
you're waking up and about 3.5 days later. I mean, this is not like your 14 to 18 hour naps. This is a three, and when you feel shitty when you get up after those, this is 3.5 days. You're probably like, what the fuck? Where am I? What the fuck happened?
So so the first thing I notice is that someone is saying in my ear, "Wake up, Michael! Wake up, Michael! Wake up, Michael!" And I opened like a glimmer of my eye, and I saw in front of me.
Oh.
Uh,
Welcome to the pearly gates. All right, go ahead.
yeah, welcome to the Matrix. I saw in front of me a bulletin board that said Greenwich Hospital,
Hmm.
and I felt the tube in my throat. And somehow I knew what was going on. And by the way, the first thought was, "Oh shit, I'm in big trouble."
Right.
And then they said to me, "Breathe out for 10 seconds. We're going to take the tube out." And I swear to God, this is exactly what I thought. I remembered from an old ER episode
Right.
them taking the tube out, which is how I knew what to do.
Oh, it's out of your nose or out of your
So
throat?
they out of my throat. So they
Wow.
took the tube out,
Hmm.
and you have to breathe out or you'll throw up all over the place.
Wow.
And they took the tube out, and I remember just sitting there and being like, make up a story quick, make up a story quick, make up a story quick, make
There's
up a
nothing
story
wrong with
quick,
me.
make up a story.
There's
And
nothing
and
wrong.
Jeff, I could have won an Academy Award. I was
Right.
like,
I'm good.
how did I get here? What happened? Who did this? Like,
Everything's okay.
it
It's
was
all good.
horrible.
It's all good. So you wake up and you're in a, what, you go to, how long were you in? Did you go to rehab? Did you go to stay in a treatment center?
Well,
Where'd you go from there?
I was in that hospital for oh my God, you remember Bernie Madoff?
Yeah.
that whole thing. So his son, I don't know if you remember, committed suicide while I was in that hospital. So I was in that hospital and
Mm-hmm.
I'm watching his son on TV commit suicide. And I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell anybody what I had done. I lied about everything. I'm
Right.
like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. I don't know how I got here. I don't know what's going on. There was this psychologist woman who was screaming at me that I'm an animal. And
Really?
I didn't say a word, Jeff. I'm an
Someone was
attorney, and
someone was screaming at you that you were
my
an animal after you wake up from that.
this woman was screaming at me, and my lawyer brain went to work and said, just don't say anything. I was really scared. I was scared I was going to lose my daughter. I was really scared that they were like going to like lock me up because I was crazy.
Well, I would probably think you
And
didn't feel that good after waking up from that experience. Just
I
physically
didn't.
animal.
I'll I
You probably felt pretty
I felt
bad.
scared. I was
Right.
really scared.
Right.
I'll tell you, above everything else, I felt alone and scared. And
You were
my
not
whole
alone,
family
my
was there. My
son.
parents were there. My brother was there, and they had flown up from Florida, and um, it was scary. It was
Right.
scary because I didn't expect to be alive,
Mm-hmm.
and so there was no like waking up and asking for help. I was scared, and I started lying like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I was really scared. I was scared I was gonna lose my daughter,
Right.
and so I thought if I just said nothing, like they got nothing on me, they can't prove it. Just say nothing. And so finally, they transferred me to a hospital because they didn't have a psych ward there. So they transferred me to a hospital where they had a psych ward, and I had a seizure at that hospital in about 45 minutes. And then they transferred me to a third hospital where I spent a couple of more days, and I finally sort of asked for help there, sort of,
Right. So where do you
and it
go?
was decided,
Where did you go? Because I know you made your way down to Florida, but you were up in
yeah,
Connecticut for a while. And how long
yeah.
did you go from that treatment center to Florida, or did you stay in Connecticut
Well, I
for a
went from
while?
that hospital to a treatment center in Florida for 2 months, an inpatient treatment center,
Mm-hmm.
and I spent 2 months inpatient, and then I spent another 2 months outpatient, and I had lost everything. I lost everything. I lost cars, the house. I was down to 3 bags of clothes.
Right.
My wife had made it clear that we were getting divorced, and started the process. I didn't have a job anymore. I had nothing. I had
Right.
absolutely nothing, and I was terrified. I had no script for the end of my life. I was depressed.
Mm-hmm.
I cried. I cried every day.
Right.
I didn't know what I was going to do with the rest of my life, and I'll tell you, this treatment center and the recovery fellowship that I wound up joining, and these therapists and people that I met there.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't easy. It was not easy, and missing my daughter and explaining to her where I was, which we didn't tell her the truth. We told her I was on a business trip and I got sick, and
Right.
being separated from her, and my entire world was turned upside down.
Right. And did you
I
and
went
from
from living in this beautiful house to being roommates with some guy, living in a twin bed.
that must
It
have been
wasn't
cool.
easy.
No. That must have been fun. You too, man. He looked at you. Yeah, me too. Um,
Yeah, me too.
so
What are you in for?
you went yeah, right. You went down to Florida, and then you got out of rehab, and then I assume that you went into some sort of like daily program. You guys started getting involved in a sort of a recovery way of life down in Florida.
So I took to it immediately.
Right.
Um, I
Right.
took to it immediately. I
Right.
um,
Spiritual.
I had nothing. I really had nothing left,
Mm-hmm.
and no one had to tell me to get down on my knees and pray. I had already developed, a spirituality in the last 5, 10 years of my life. I had already been doing certain things that I found out were of great strength in recovery that I didn't even know, because I didn't even know what recovery was. I had never met anybody who had gone to rehab. I didn't even know what these things were. By the way, I didn't even know that I was an alcoholic or an addict. I used to, in
Right.
treatment, I called myself chemically dependent for the first 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what I was. I really thought that I was just stressed out and tired.
It
Um,
feels. I would assume that it feels once you recognize what the problem is, and you intellectually, you conceptually understand you're an addict, and you actually admit it to yourself, and you're not afraid to admit it. things probably start getting a little easier because you want to make things better. I mean, if you're fighting it,
It
you're still
wasn't,
fighting it.
yeah, it wasn't until I was about 60 days out of treatment, so
Mm-hmm.
about 120 days sober,
Mm-hmm.
that I realized I had hit the jackpot, that it wasn't a curse, it was a blessing,
Right.
that I was finally going to attack the things that bothered me, and that there were reasons why I drank and used all those years. And I was finally in the right place to finally figure out who I was and why I did the things I did. And I really felt like I had hit the jackpot.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going through incredible, incredible stress of getting divorced and being separated from my daughter and rebuilding a career and having no money and living at my parents' house for the first time since I was 18 years old
Mm-hmm.
and not having a car and, all sorts of things that they weren't humiliating or humbling. They were just different. And I loved it. I
Right.
learned to live with no money. I learned
Right.
to be appreciative for a toothbrush and toothpaste and 50 cents to buy a Diet Coke. I mean, these things
Right.
may sound weird, but I
Right.
became very grateful for the very small things in life.
Well, you're
And,
also not lying
and
to yourself anymore, and you were working to get out from underneath the addiction, and you were just grateful for the little things at that point because of how
I,
bad it was before.
yeah,
And it's incredible
I
that
was, I was, by the way, I was shocked to be alive. I was
right,
shocked.
right,
For a very long time, I could not believe that I was alive.
right.
Um,
So
and
go ahead. I'm sorry. Finish up.
no, no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that from my discussions with people that have gone into programs, there is a major, there's like a paradigm shift in, call it, the spirituality of the person. People, they find something bigger than them to help carry them through this transition back to some
Yeah,
sort of normalcy. I mean, we don't need to talk about what the program is exactly or whatever, but
yeah.
I mean, maybe you might want to talk about what people gravitate to and why a lot of people will say, a higher power called spirituality, whatever it may be, because you became a lot more spiritual and a lot more religious after this event and cleaning
Yeah,
up and getting sober.
yeah, yeah. And again, that's just again, it's just my walk. I never say across the board that this is the only way to get sober.
Hmm.
Um, but this is what worked for me. And by the way, I used to sit in treatment and cry in these groups. I want my old life back. I want my old life back. I want my old life back.
Hmm.
I would never take my old life back except to be back with my daughter and to take back all the people that I hurt. Um,
Well,
because I hurt a lot of people.
you didn't hurt me that bad. You just made me hang up the phone one night on you because I thought you were fucking crazy. You're like, you call me. I just gotta like, I gotta. You call me one night. You're like, from Connecticut. You're like, why, why are you friends? Why you just become friends with my friend on Facebook? I know you're conspiring against me. I
Yeah,
said,
you had a whole conspiracy.
I'm like, Mike,
Um,
I'll talk to you
I was out of my mind.
when you're out of your mind.
Yeah,
Yeah, I knew it.
keep doing
It was,
drugs, buddy.
yeah,
So what worked for me was the recognition that I didn't have the power to overcome this on my own, and I needed to find a higher power. Um, which is the mainstay of a lot of recovery fellowships, and you hear a lot about this. I kind of took it seriously,
mm-hmm.
and I
No, it's great.
eventually, and so I started studying. Um, I converted from Judaism to Christianity and eventually became a Catholic. I'm a Eucharistic minister in my church.
Your father loved
Um,
that.
my my father and my mom love. People always say to me, how does your mother take it?" I say, "Not any worse than Jesus' mom took it. Don't worry."
Right. It's the same
So
book. It's
I
just written a
kind of
little differently.
I kind of took the whole thing pretty seriously, but I've
Right.
always kind of been into spirituality and religion. I was a little kid who read a lot about Buddhism and Hinduism, and you and I as little kids, we loved Star Wars, which is based on Taoism, and
Mm,
I really have always been sort of a amateur student of comparative theology, and so I've
mm,
taken a lot of classes. I became an ordained minister along the way, and
right.
I love this. And so the program that I run now is a spiritually based program, and it's not a faith based program. I meet people where they are and help them find their own higher power.
Right.
Um, and it's just something that I love. Like some people are computer geeks. I'm a God geek. I just love it.
Right.
So it's what worked for me, and it's what eventually put me at peace. There are other kinds of recovery programs which are not higher power based, and they work for people.
Right.
So if that works for people, that's wonderful. But this is what worked for me, which is why I advocate this and why I teach this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's the greatest thing in the world because it finally allowed me to go back to that 12-year-old who was so not at peace and
Right.
find out why I wasn't at peace, why I never was at peace, to make peace not only with me,
Mm,
but with those around me,
right.
and to make peace with, for lack of a better word, God, the universe, the entire thing around us, and to really be comfortable in my own skin for the first time.
Right.
It's not perfect, by the way. I'm not saying that I
No.
float around. I do
No.
not. I get stressed
I
out. I
get
get
it.
angry. I get,
I get it. I get it. You're just not taking 400
but
pills.
it's amazingly better than it used to be. And so what has happened is the desire. I don't go through life trying not to drink or use one day at a time. That's not what life is like. The only time
Mm.
I think about it is when I'm teaching a class. What it's allowed me to
But I
do is
mean, in the
to
beginning, you
completely
did.
remove that desire. It did, yeah.
I mean,
So at the
I
beginning,
mean,
it was tough.
it's a very small percentage of people in recovery that stay sober. I mean, it's a few percent
That's true.
people that
Right.
go into recovery programs. And you were down in
Right.
Florida, and Florida is like this. I didn't even know this till I came to visit you. Like, you live in this town. I'm not going to mention the town, but like every shop, every coffee shop, every restaurant, like everybody outside is fucking a drug
Yeah.
was a drug addict in this. It's like Drugville recovery town, and like
Yeah.
there's like a major
Well, so
belt.
yeah, it's like Southern California because I guess if you're going to get sober, you might as well have it be sunny and a beach. So
Right. I would have to think with the proliferation of drugs and the availability of drugs and the fact that drugs have just become more rampant. I mean, when we were kids, it was like really people that did drugs. It was like taboo. It was like secret. There's drugs everywhere now. There's people smoking pot
there are
on the
drugs
street.
everywhere.
There's people
Yeah.
drinking. There's people having prescriptions to opiates. I mean, the amount of people that are addicts now, percentage-wise, population, it has to be greater than it was when we were younger. I would think. It's
Much
bet
greater. Yeah.
it's huge.
So one of the big problems in middle and high schools now is the proliferation of juuls and vapes. So one of the
Right.
big things is kids walking around with THC in their vapes now and in their juuls.
Right. They're
So and
getting
it's a
sick.
huge problem in schools.
Hmm.
So yeah, the problem is, and soon the THC is going to be legal in most states. So it's about to be legal here. It's legal in California and Colorado and all sorts of states, and it's causing problems. But it's very important to point out that alcohol and drugs are not by themselves bad things.
Hmm.
I happen to have been blessed or cursed or just lucky enough to get the disease of alcoholism and addiction. Um, so it really depends on the person and what they're used for. Because again, these things have been around since the beginning of the time. So I'm not an anti-alcohol or really anti-drug thing. I happen to think when it comes to opiates, I think opiates are ridiculous.
Right.
I happen to think that there's better ways to treat pain than opiates. I still have the same pain, by the way,
Right.
that was being treated with opiates back then.
I
I just
think.
do holistic things now.
I mean, I think Klonopin is almost as addictive as heroin. They say it's an incredibly
So yeah,
intoxicating drug, and
and
it's prescription based.
the yeah, the overprescription of anti-anxiety medications like benzodiazepines, which really are not effective at treating anxiety. So I've gotten a lot more involved in that,
Hmm.
and taking people off of those things and giving them a real way to live and deal with their anxiety for good and for all, rather than just putting a band-aid on it.
Right.
I was prescribed, Klonopin and Xanax and in the old days Valium since I was probably 11 or 12 years old for anxiety because I was afraid to fly,
Right.
and doctors would give it out like candy. But that's what they did. you know?
Mm,
And doctors still do that. It's just not an effective way to deal with anxiety.
right. Well,
So there are better ways to
I
deal
think
with
it's
it.
important to point out that if anybody is listening, most people have some form. Not everybody's walking
Yeah.
around skipping and happy. Everybody has some form of
Sure.
anxiety. Everybody has some form of stress
Yeah.
and fear. But if it veers off in a direction where you start using drugs to self-medicate and make yourself feel better, or try and make yourself feel normal, or you feel yourself going down that hole, I think you
Right.
need to stop based off what we're talking about here, and take an inventory of what's going on with you.
Right.
I think that's really like the important thing to really point out tonight. That I want to point out
Yeah. And
because
our society, as you know, is pill crazy. If it's not that, it's something else, and
there are a
always
lot of
trying to find a quick fix.
people that are self-medicating and don't know it. And if you don't know what
Right.
self-medicating is, you're self-prescribing some substance, whether illegal or not illegal, to make yourself feel better, right?
Right.
Right. Your story is like incredible, and I really
It's very
appreciate you.
dangerous.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing it and coming on. And I mean, it's really honest and it's really brave of you. I just we're probably going to be winding down in a few minutes, but I want to. What should someone do if they are moving or moving in this direction of what happened to you, like using drugs for this reason, or they have incredible anxiety or fear? Maybe they're a teenager, maybe they're a young kid, maybe they're 20, 30, whatever it may be. A lot of people don't know what to do, but
Sure.
we're making it obvious what's going on if they're listening. So what would you suggest would be the next step?
Here's the good news.
Mm.
My story is during a time when there was no such thing as the opiate crisis. Now there's so many resources around. Florida has a system called 211 where you could pick up the phone and literally ask for help.
Right.
You can walk into any emergency room. You can walk into any police station and ask for help. You can find somebody on the internet and ask for help. You can call the suicide hotline. You can walk into any recovery fellowship and ask for help. I didn't know this. You can pick up the phone and call a detox, a treatment center, a hospital. You can call anybody. If people want to get my phone number through you, that's okay. I'm happy to help you try to find resources in your area. But it's such a widespread, well-known thing these days, um, that it's really easy to find resources. And if you don't have financial resources for it, there are so many county and state facilities nowadays to help people, and there's federal funding for it. So that's the really, really good news. If you have a child who is suffering and starting to see uh, signs of addiction, one of the things that I tell people is get them into service. You know, get them to a soup kitchen, get
Mm-hmm.
them to serve in their religious organizations. And these are family diseases, and kids do something called modeling. If they don't see their parents doing it, they won't do it. So you can't tell your kid to do something unless you do it. So if
Right.
you want to teach your kid good behavior, you're going to have to do the behavior also. So
Right.
one of the reasons why service works is because you teach people to get outside of their head and to help other people, and it really helps the addicted brain to start helping other people, and there's a payoff in the brain, and
Mm-hmm.
you learn that you are a real usefulness to other people, and it's one of the great ways to head off addiction.
Right.
And
One
there's
of the
lots of
things
studies being done. Yeah,
you
go ahead.
and related to what you're saying, and you're talking about your daughter and how she felt about it. I have a little boy that's 2 years and 8 months, and
Yeah.
look, I'm not perfect. I'm not living this lifestyle that you were living. Sometimes I feel like I might, but I'm not. But obviously, I don't want him to grow up in a stressful environment or have him have anxiety in it.
Right.
So, I guess, what other suggestions would you have other than what you just said? Showing, being involved in service and showing him that as an example. I mean, obviously, there's love and all that, but what are the things have you learned along the way that you think you could have done differently
Look,
with your
and
daughter?
again, I can only tell you what worked for me. The lack of spirituality for me as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
I believe, caused me to have more fear than was necessary, because I always felt like there was no net under me,
Right.
that I never believed that everything was going to be okay. And so spirituality and religion for me has allowed me to believe that somehow, some way, there's a grand design of everything, and everything's going to be okay. So I'm a huge advocate of getting involved in religious organizations, or at least spiritual organizations,
Right. So with your
um, and
children, etc.
with your children. And so even if that means going, once a week to Shabbat services, or to church services, or whatever it is, or getting involved in a Buddhist temple or a Hindu temple, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
or getting, doing some meditation, or just maybe going around the dinner table, what's the best part of your day and the worst part of your day, getting your kids to open up to you and tell you and start to express their feelings, and maybe a brief prayer, or just a wishful a wishful thought for those, suffering, or less fortunate than us,
Mm-hmm.
something to bring us out of this crazy society that we're in, that's constantly on Twitter and constantly on Facebook and Instagram, and to some reality of how the world actually works,
Right.
because kids are so focused on that stuff nowadays, that we're growing up with a sense of doom and gloom,
Right.
rather than some
Hope.
structure to the world, and losing that cohesive bond that family
Right.
used to have.
No, I hear you, man. That's great advice. And with that said, man, I just really appreciate you being here and sharing your
Yeah, it's
story.
been fun.
And I knew a lot about your story, and I really appreciate that were willing to share it. And I think anybody that was listening or will listen um, will really learn a lot. It was honest, and I love you for being here, and I appreciate it. Thanks for coming.
I love you, brother.
All
Thanks
right,
for the
man.
time.
All right, have a great night.
Take
Good
care.
talking. Bye bye.
You too.